This really has been a whole of government effort, and this has been the DOJ's actions, where they are all trying to work in concert to make Maduro feel pressure and that he should step down. If all of the pressure works, in theory, the military doesn't need to do anything more than they have.
Welcome to Deep Dive. This week, we're examining the escalating tensions in the Western Hemisphere as President Trump's aggressive campaign against drug cartels puts unprecedented pressure on Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. From lethal strikes on suspected smuggling vessels to a double bounty on Maduro's head and warships streaming into the Caribbean, the U.S. is treating cartels like Al-Qaeda level threats. Joining us is Mike Brest, the reporter who broke several key stories on these developments for the Washington Examiner. Well, Mike, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start with some foundational context and dive into your reporting. So your reporting details how this all boiled over in recent months. Can you walk us through the timeline? When did we first see these U.S. military strikes on cartel boats in the Caribbean, and what sparked the administration's decision to declare an armed conflict with drug cartels as outlined in that memo to Congress?
That's a great place to start. And so, this campaign of the U.S. military targeting alleged drug vessels in the Caribbean, particularly those coming from Venezuela, began in early September. And in the past 7 weeks or so, there have been, to our knowledge, at least a dozen of these strikes, killing more than 50 people that we know of. And so, this has been a part of the administration's overall broader effort to curb illegal drug trafficking coming into the country, particularly from Central and South America. And so the administration had worked their way up to this policy through a number of different decisions that they made over the first several months of the administration, dating back to their decision to label some of these cartels foreign terrorist organizations, which gave them additional authorities for how to combat them that we're seeing now.
I see. And the strikes have now expanded to the Eastern Pacific. And your piece on the first lethal engagement, there were notes that it killed 2 people on a vessel allegedly tied to smuggling routes from Venezuela. How did you verify the intelligence behind these targets, and what challenges did you face in getting the Pentagon to confirm details like the presence of narcotics on board?
So a lot of the details that we have right now are at the discretion of the Pentagon, which is a sad reality of trying to report on military operations like this. And so it is, as you said, very difficult to confirm some of these things that come out of the department, but it requires looking at media, local media from Latin America, seeing what they're reporting, and trying to get other sources as well. And so it is a very interesting and hard dynamic, but I should also note that the administration has not released any evidence to the public or to Congress that we know of to show definitively that there were drugs on these vessels, and the department has not released the names of anyone who were killed in these strikes. And so the lack of public information has been a significant question and a significant sort of outstanding issue that we're seeing even on Capitol Hill as Congress goes through a shutdown. We are still seeing members really of both parties talk about these strikes and ask for additional information from the administration.
I see. So no physical evidence of drugs that has been shown yet to the public.
That's correct.
Okay. And so these operations kicked off in early September with at least 10 strikes, killing over 30 people, mostly in international waters. So Trump's memo frames cartels as unlawful combatants, justifying lethal force without arrests, which echoes post 9/11 tactics. So does this raise due process questions?
It absolutely does. And so to unwind that question a little, as you mentioned, in the post 9/11 era, Congress gave the president authority, and they worked through how to respond to the September 11th attacks. That obviously resulted in 2 wars, one in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so Congress controls the power to declare war. However, over the last several decades, they have sort of ceded some of that power to the executive branch, to the president. And so President Trump has used some of the existing military authorizations to classify these actions uh, and to carry out these strikes. And so this is an important aspect, an important part of the conversation because what the administration did is they decided to stop viewing these drug smugglers uh, as uh, worthy of due process or eligible for due process, and they are instead considered armed combatants. And so what that means is lethal action is allowed effectively. And so that's why for decades, up until really this administration, the Coast Guard had largely been in charge of handling the stopping of drugs coming in either by land or by water from the southern border because it was a law enforcement issue where smugglers would be arrested, brought into the United States, where they would face charges and due process. Obviously, with the U.S. conducting lethal strikes, these individuals are no longer alive for due process.
I see. And your articles paint a picture of a massive U.S. military surge, deploying the General R. Ford carrier strike group, B-1 Lancer bombers flying near Venezuela's coast, MQ-9 Reaper drones, and even docking the USS Gravely in Trinidad and Tobago. So what do you believe Trump ultimately wants out of this? Is it just disrupting drug flows, or does your reporting suggest a broader push for regime change in Venezuela?
That's the million-dollar question. And so, from the experts I've spoken with, the number of forces and the firepower and manpower that the U.S. military currently has in the greater Caribbean area is much larger than is necessary to carry out these drug interdiction strikes. And so, given the amount of firepower in the region, as well as President Trump's acknowledgement that he authorized the CIA to operate within Venezuela, as well as talk hypothetically about potential strikes on Venezuelan soil, it does seem that this is only a stepping stone to greater operations. Now, it's unclear exactly what that looks like and whether or not that would target Maduro specifically, but I have heard from a number of experts that logical targets that they could see the U.S. targeting if they were to expand that operation would be things like drug facilities, drug lines, sort of processing centers, and even where the cartels are generally located within Venezuela. And so all of those would be targets that would not effectively push Maduro out. But a part of this whole conversation is just applying undue amounts of pressure on him to make him feel like he doesn't have any other options. And so, there are a number of people who believe the administration is ultimately angling for Maduro to step down, the question is whether or not they would be willing to try and make that happen militarily or just diplomatically. And so, all of this significant force presence in the region may be used, but it might only be used as a show of force to convince Maduro that he doesn't have any other options.
I see. And Secretary Hegseth has compared cartels to Al Qaeda, saying each strike saves 25,000 American lives from fentanyl laced drugs. So, how did you source those claims, and what pushback did you get from experts on whether this war on cartels is legally sustainable without congressional approval?
So, from Secretary Hegseth's claim about the amount of lives that are saved, uh, the way they get that estimate is they look at the number of people who die from overdoses every year and how much of that is believed to come from outside the country. And they believe that that's how many people, in theory, the amount of drugs on that ship would have killed or could have killed in America. That being said, it's almost impossible to verify that exact claim because we don't know about the drugs on those vessels specifically. So that claim is very hard uh, to confirm. But the point he is trying to make when he says that is that they stop the drugs inevitably from coming into the country by blowing the vessel up.
I see.
When it comes to his comparisons to Al Qaeda, really what he is trying to do is change the narrative and the belief that these drug smugglers are harmless smugglers. And so to him, the fact that the military is treating them now the same way they treated Al Qaeda is an equivalence he's trying to make.
I see. And shifting to Caracas, Attorney General Pam Bondi, she doubled the bounty on Maduro to $50 million, accusing him of leading the cartel, the Suns, and smuggling 30 tons of cocaine. So your coverage notes the U.S. has seized $700 million in his assets. So, how did you learn about this escalation, and what was the administration's messaging when you pressed them on tying Maduro directly to the groups like Tren de Aragua or the ELN?
So it should be noted that the US's stance towards Maduro predates this specific Trump administration, actually dates back to the last Trump administration. And so in 2020, the Department of Justice indicted Nicolas Maduro under the allegations that he and several others were effectively operating a drug ring out of Venezuela with the intent to flood the US with drugs so that American users would feel the side effects. And so that's sort of some of the background on how the Trump administration from the first term look at Nicolas Maduro now. And so that's part of this. And as you mentioned, there is the bounty that Attorney General Pambani doubled from $25 million to $50 million. And so that once again is just another component that the Trump administration is trying to use to make Maduro feel even more pressure. And so it's another lever this time specifically trying to hopefully convince someone in his inner circle to turn on him. And why would they do that? Because if they do, they would get $50 million from the United States. And so it is a pretty large incentive, and they're hoping that someone will take them up on that. There was a recent reporting earlier this week that a U.S. official even sent that listing, that the DOJ announcement that the bounty was increased to $50 million to one of Maduro's pilots who they were trying to convince to turn on him. And so this really has been a whole of government effort, and this has been the DOJ's actions, where they are all trying to work in concert to make Maduro feel pressure and that he should step down. And if all of the pressure works, in theory, the military doesn't need to do anything more than they have or will continue to do.
I see. And Maduro's reaction has been fiery. He's mobilizing 4.5 million militia members, calling it a defense against CIA coups, and he even accused the U.S. of killing an innocent Colombian fisherman. In your view, what options does he have next? Diplomacy, alliances with Russia or China, or risking a hot war as Trump hints at strikes on Venezuelan land? And he reportedly offered everything to de escalate. Did your sources confirm what that might entail?
So it's unclear exactly what Maduro may have offered to the U.S. And what the U.S.'s response was. But what is clear is he is under a significant amount of pressure. However, the Trump administration thought back in 2020 that he was under a significant amount of pressure, and that they thought they would be able to force him out then, and he was able to withstand that pressure campaign when he, as the U.S. says, stole an election. He was able to maintain and withstand that pressure, and there weren't significant protests in Caracas in the streets that the U.S. was hoping to see at the time. And so while it seems like Maduro is under a significant amount of pressure now, he has in the past been able to avoid giving everything up. And so it's unclear exactly now. However, as you mentioned, he has not shown a readiness to really give up. And so it's unclear exactly how he will react, but he has at least verbalized that he was going to stand up and fight. And he even mentioned earlier this week that they have a large arsenal of air defense systems provided from Russia. And so, as you mentioned, that is one of their primary allies outside of the region. And so it's unclear exactly how that could play out, but that is something that the military is considering as they look at their options moving forward.
And your reporting highlights some interesting questions, like the decision to repatriate two survivors from a strike on a submersible vessel, sending them back to Ecuador and Colombia without U.S. charges. So experts you quoted called it baffling, asking why not detain them like Al Qaeda fighters at Guantanamo. How did you uncover this?
So this was a story that came out a couple of days after the strike initially occurred, and the administration acknowledged tacitly that there were survivors first and that they weren't keeping them. And so it raised the question as to why, especially because, as we mentioned earlier in this interview, Secretary Hegseth has compared these traffickers to Al Qaeda. And so, if they are the equivalent of Al Qaeda, why would you just hand them back over to their home countries? And so, Secretary Hegseth said when he was asked about this publicly, that there were times during the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq where they would capture fighters, in the midst of battle and ultimately hand them back over to the other side. But at the same time, the U.S. also has Guantanamo Bay, which is where they're still holding 15 detainees from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so those 15 people have been held at Guantanamo Bay for almost the last 20 years. And so it raises the question of if these people are at the same level doing the same type of deeds that Al Qaeda is doing, as Hex has said, why would you give them up when you are still holding people who you hold responsible for 9/11? And so, one thing that I heard from experts and lawyers who have looked at this reporting, is that they believe the administration is concerned that if they were to bring them in front of a judge and try and charge them with anything, the government themselves would be forced to provide evidence that they may not want to share regarding the legality of these strikes.
I see. And Southcom's Admiral Alvin Halsey is announcing his early retirement amid concerns over the mission. Your piece notes that he's the latest top officer to exit under Hegseth. Did you speak to Halsey and his team? And how does this timing factor into the bigger picture of congressional skepticism, especially with briefings but no full war declaration?
So, Admiral Alvin Halsey has been a widely respected admiral who spent decades in the service. And so he's only about a year into a 3-year term when he announced that he will resign in December. And so this sent significant shockwaves throughout the public, throughout the media, throughout the department, because he is the person who is overseeing this campaign outside of Venezuela. And so it's unclear exactly. There has been some reporting that he was not comfortable with the strikes, but he has not publicly come out and said anything specifically about the strikes. And so it's unclear exactly how his uh, upcoming retirement will affect the mission, if at all. But as you mentioned, he is the latest senior military officer to either resign or be fired since the president and Secretary Hegseth have taken over. And it really shows that the secretary has tried to remake the senior military class officers aligned with his view of how the military should operate. And now that's not necessarily a bad thing because the Secretary of Defense has the right to ask someone for their resignation and put people in place who they believe can carry out the mission they want. But it is an inordinate amount of turnover that we've seen over the first year of the Trump administration that has definitely been outside of the norm.
I see. And Mike, you've been on this beat for months. Walk us through your method. How do you balance anonymous sources from the Pentagon and White House with on the ground reporting in Latin America? I know you mentioned there's a lot of local media as well, and you have other sources. Any close calls chasing leads on these classified strikes? And how do you fact check those claims like Trump's denial of the B-1 bomber flights when officials confirm them off record?
So it's really difficult because all of this is very sensitive information, and reporters try not to release classified information or any information that they believe would endanger the lives of any service members. And so it is a very difficult balance. We also turn towards former military officials who can provide context on things that we may not particularly understand and want a deeper understanding of. And so, whether it's former officials or even veterans who are now in various fields that align with this subject or another subject, are often good resources that reporters will frequently utilize.
Well, Well, your work has illuminated a story that's equal parts national security thriller and legal drama. So thank you so much for joining us and sharing how you piece this all together. And of course, we look forward to more of your reporting. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much for watching Deep Dive. Please visit our website for more of these investigations and feel free to send us your questions or story ideas. We hope to see you back here next week.